Happy post-Veterans Day, Daniel.
Is that a real thing?
The Veterans Hangover is. So what are we talking about today?
All right, let's talk about this 50-year mortgage. Asking for a raise at work and the prep that goes into it, and then what to do when your income is insufficient and you're assessing maybe alternative opportunities.
Welcome to the Science of Wealth, where we discuss the science behind financial planning and the art of learning and applying it. All right, hot topic of the week or of the month here: the proposal for 50-year mortgages, and then something about raises and job changes, whatever. All right, mortgages though. That's the exciting topic, right?
It is for me.
Yeah, you looking to get yourself a 50-year loan?
Maybe after today's conversation, I'll consider it.
All right, well, hit me. What do we want to know?
All right, so there's been a lot of news around this 50-year mortgage, right? I guess in an attempt to make home buying more affordable for, generations such as mine, where people are struggling to buy homes, right? And with interest rates where they are and home prices where they are, right? There's only so many levers we can pull. I guess just expanding the time of a loan is one of the remaining levers per se. I'm being told it's a quote unquote game changer, mainly, assumed because of the lower monthly payment one would obtain from this longer loan. But 50 years is a pretty long time. That's about double as long as I've been on this earth. So I bet it comes with some trade-offs. So is this 50-year mortgage, as large as being advertised, Dan?
I can see cases where somebody would benefit from it. I think there's a lot of financial optimization problems with it, but if you extend the term from 30 years to 50 years, then the interest payments can be a little bit less, and consequently, because they're a little bit less, that gives you more time to go ahead and be able to afford it functionally. I think the approach where a 50-year mortgage, if we're being generous, is going to make sense is A, monthly payment's going to be lower, and B, in a perfect world, your home, your income, inflation, all this stuff will happen over time. And so maybe you could have had it paid off by year 30 and you don't have it paid off by year 30, but because of all those factors, the cost of your housing has gotten less and less and less. That's sort of the optimistic silver line view of it.
So I did some rough math here just to give the audience a little bit of context in terms of how that would reduce a monthly payment and maybe what percentage of your mortgage payment month over month would now be going to principal and interest, and how that changes on a 30 versus 50-year time horizon. So let's say you took out a $500,000 loan, paid monthly at, let's say, 6%. If it was a 30-year mortgage, you'd be paying $2,997.75 per month. So that would equate to 360 payments over the loan's duration. Of that 360, payments per month, that would equate to $1,079,190. Of that, 54% would be interest. Now, on a 50-year mortgage, that equates to 600 payments, and that equates to $1,579,214.38. And of that, do you want to guess now how much goes to interest as opposed to principal, given the 30-year was 54% interest?
I'll go super extreme. I'll say it's 80% interest.
68. So not exactly that harsh, but still a considerable difference. A little bit over $1 million now going to interest, as opposed to a little bit over $500,000 going to interest on the 30-year loan.
So what ends up being the sort of differential here, right? How much we end up saving monthly versus paying, over the course of the loan by comparison?
Equates to about $300 a month, right? Without doing the actual numbers for the savings. So call that, $3,600 a year. But the difference equates to about $500,000 more paid over the duration of 50 years as opposed to 30s.
I'm not big on the like religious concept of usury, because I think it sort of has a money avoidance or money scarcity mentality. I think there's some money script issues in that, but I gotta say, when you're going to end up paying an extra $500,000 on your original $500,000 loan, that does start to smack of that a little bit.
Yeah, I guess like in what situations would someone benefit from this, right? The monthly payment is lower, sure, but I don't know, like to me it's not that much lower.
Well, I'm going to take a case study example here. So imagine you're a teacher here in the St. Vrain Valley School District. I think teachers right now in St. Vrain are starting around 60,000. So like housing is very hard to afford here, based on that. Now, if you get married, if you have a spousal income, like that gets more affordable. But imagine a scenario where you're trying to buy a $500,000 house or a $400,000 house on a starting salary of 60,000. It's going to be very difficult to save up for the down payment, let alone support the mortgage payments over time. So I can see a scenario where you're like, I am going to spend my career here. Like, I'm going to be in the St. Vrain district my whole career. I'm going to be at a certain university my whole career. And I think there is a benefit here to housing cost stabilization, right? The P&I is not going to get any worse. So it's really then just a question of your insurance costs and your property tax. I can see that being a better alternative to renting in a scenario where you otherwise would be not able to afford a 30-year mortgage and you'd spend your life renting. But on the other end of that, like, I think you're seeing some really bizarre, like, contra arguments. I don't even know that they're counter arguments, but these contra arguments, you're seeing people post things like, the biggest problem with a 30-year mortgage isn't the 30-year mortgage. It's that all the interest is front loaded. And you're seeing these really bizarre proposals that like 50% of your payment should go to principal on the very first payment. And like, that's just not how the math works. Like, there's no way to effectuate that.
Do you think there's a scenario here where someone could take out a 50-year mortgage with the intention of just paying 30 years, in turn really just having a lower payment and, reaping the benefits of the lower monthly payment, but intending on paying it over 30 years anyways?
I think that could make sense in a financial optimization scenario. So like, and really this just depends on the interest rates. Like your case study used 6%. 6% would be a pretty good rate in today's environment. I don't know that it makes sense in break-even calculus, if you're just going to spend 50 years investing in the S&P 500 or something like that. But if we got back down to, 2.5%, 3% mortgages, I could see somebody going ahead and saying, yeah, I'm willing to pay a mortgage for the next 50 years because I'm just going to go ahead and invest and bank the difference. That does put a huge emphasis on the behavioral differential, right? Which is, there's all these things about, investing instead of paying down your mortgage, or buy term, invest the difference. But, you really do have to have the discipline and willpower and automation to make sure that you actually do that to get the actual benefit out of it.
Yeah, I think, when I think about our clients in their 50s and 60s, yeah, and don't have it paid off yet, it's almost always one of the larger conversation pieces, right? It's, I want to pay off my mortgage. Rarely do I see people say, yeah, no, I got a good rate and I want to keep it. They seem to feel that they'd sleep better at night knowing they don't have that liability over their head. And I can't imagine that getting any better if they now have a 50-year mortgage as opposed to a 30-year mortgage.
I agree with that wholeheartedly. I could see a case where somebody sort of is doing like a version of a reverse mortgage. Like, let's say you do your, my kids are grown and gone, downsize into retirement, housing change. I could see somebody, saying, instead of rolling all the equity from my last house into my next house, I will take a 50-year mortgage on this and I will die with a big mortgage. But all I'm doing is trying to like minimize my housing cost and maximize my liquid cash reserve. I could see a strategy like that being a use case, but I do agree, we tend to find a lot of people sleep a lot better at night getting their mortgage paid off or having the payment be so low and de minimis that they just don't worry about it.
Okay. So overall take is, do you think, if somebody asked you to describe this succinctly, are you pro 50-year mortgage or are you against the 50-year mortgage? Do you think it's overall a net benefit for us, or probably something that's out of that?
I'm pro 50-year mortgage insofar as I want the option. I am against 50-year mortgage from a financial planning optimization standpoint, but for lower income people, for people who don't have a lot of cash flow flexibility, for people who really just want to have ownership and are going to have a really hard time getting there on 30-year mortgages, I like the optionality for them. I don't like what it does to them financially, but I'd prefer that they had the choice to do it than not having the option available to them and never being able to become homeowners.
Okay, so somebody maybe higher income who does have the ability to purchase a home, probably not an option, but it does maybe open the opportunity for lower income people who wouldn't have the opportunity to purchase a home to now have that.
Pretty much.
Okay. And just so I get the actual figures here too, because I was specific on the earlier ones, the monthly payment would be reduced by $365 per month and 73 cents. It would increase the total payment over the 20 new years of the loan by $500,023.43.
Saving $3,600 a year to pay $500,000 long term seems like a great deal.
All right. So, Dan, I have a big conversation at the end of the year coming up with my boss, and I want to make sure I'm well equipped for it. I'm going to ask for a big raise. Hope it goes my way. So, what are some of the big points I should be really considering on how to make a case for myself here?
You must be changing jobs.
It's for my other job.
Oh, I see. Yes, of course. The other job. As far as the baseline things go to this, I think a lot of people sort of go at this sort of question or request half-cocked. They just sort of say like, hey, I want more money. I'm going to go ask for more money. And in total fairness, in most scenarios, that will not go badly. You may not get what you want, but like most companies are not going to turn around and be like, how dare you ask? You're fired. I think you need to have a couple of things, to be armed with as you get into that conversation. Number one, understand your market value, right? So take a neutral step back and look at your job, the experience and education you have that makes you qualified to do it, and go look at the marketplace for that job at other companies or in other organizations and assess whether you can command a greater price than you currently receive in other places, and be honest about it, right? Like some people will be like, oh, if I got this job at Apple or Google, right, famously competitive places to get a job at, I'd be making $60,000 more a year. And be like, well, if you are not, no offense to anybody, but if you are not like an Apple or Google quality, engineer or whatever your particular background and experience is, don't use that as a market rate. That's just setting yourself up to be disappointed. I think the second thing is understanding where you fit into the business model. Are you a revenue generator, or are you, an overhead item in it, right? Do you actually create, new revenue? Do you create profits in this organization and in its deliverables, or are you part of the support infrastructure? That's going to have a direct impact on how your request for more compensation is viewed. Because if you are a revenue generator, you can then make a case that I'm going to help generate more revenue to help pay for this raise, and therefore the net benefit to the company will be even bigger. But if you fit on the more overhead and operations expenses side, that's going to be a harder case to make. I think, understanding at the end of the day how your role contributes to the top line revenue and preserves the bottom line profit is pretty important. And lastly, what I'll say here is you don't just ask for money. Ask for responsibility and ask to be paid for that responsibility. So don't just say like, I want to get paid $10,000 more a year, full stop. Okay, unless you're grossly underpaid, that is not going to get you very far. But if you say, I want to be responsible for this, or be, create this or do this, or, have more responsibility and therefore provide more value to the organization, because of that, I would like to be better paid. That's going to be a better case than just give me more money, please.
Yeah, you bring up some good points there, Dan, right? Like when I think about how I'm going to go about asking for this raise with my boss, I'm not thinking about all I want, right? And why I'm underpaid. It's wise to think about the other party and how this is going to benefit them, right? Don't think about it through your shoes. Think about it through the person you're asking for a raise's shoes, right? Like, why should they give it to you? They're already paying you to do the job. I think it's kind of like anything in life, right? Like, think about what the other person wants or what benefits them from what you're asking. It's not all about you. And frankly, if you just ask from a selfish perspective, it's probably not going to come across the way you think it's going to.
Yeah, and ultimately, right, that is sort of the fundamental basis for all commerce and exchange, right? You don't, to go back to Adam Smith, right, the butcher doesn't butcher, the baker doesn't bake for your benefit. They do it to provide for their family. So the value proposition of just saying, give me more money is not a value proposition, but the value proposition of saying, help me help you. By the way, if you could give me a share of what the benefit that gives to you, we would all be better off. That's a much better plea.
So I wanted to touch on some ancillary topics kind of related to this. So first and foremost, I call it the pseudo raise. So I recently was talking to somebody about this specific topic, and they told me, "Oh, I get a raise every single year," and I said, "Oh, that's great. How much more, if you don't mind me asking?" They said, "Every year, my boss pays me 3% more for the same responsibilities I currently have than I'm getting paid now." That's not a raise, is it, Dan?
No, not really. That's just an inflation adjustment. I mean, you could get ticky-tack here and say, well, inflation over the last year was 2.7%, so technically 3% is really a raise, but it's close enough. I think generally speaking, if your salary or your pay bands are not keeping pace with inflation, then you have a double negative. You're getting paid less than you were being paid last year in purchasing power, and you're more experienced, which means you should be more valuable. So then you're getting paid less for your level of experience.
Bummer. What about asking for a bonus as opposed to a raise, right? Raise is going to be permanent. The employer will have to pay you that moving forward indefinitely. But a bonus, right? That's one time. If I'm an employer, I'll probably negotiate or try to get this person asking for a raise to just settle for a bonus. If I'm an employee, should I settle for that, or should I really push hard for the raise?
I think it's sort of a sliding scale. It really depends on how incentive-driven your compensation structure is versus kind of stability-oriented, right? It's like if you're in sales, you frankly should expect most of your income to come from commissions or bonuses, not from base. But if you are an office administrator or a compliance person or something like that, then frankly the raise is more meaningful to you than the bonus. So I think it really just depends on your role, but all things being equal, right, raises exist in perpetuity, bonuses exist in one-time instances. So it also just becomes a question of scale, right? Like if I'm making $50,000 a year, I'd rather get a $10,000 one-time bonus than a 1% raise, just because even though it's in perpetuity, it's going to take me forever to hit a break even on a 1% raise on $50,000 versus a $10,000 bonus, right? It's a 20-year break even. So time value of money then says the bonus outweighs the raise in that case.
Yes. All right, what about unique ways to get paid more, right? I've had this conversation with my boss. He doesn't want to give me a bonus. He also doesn't want to give me a raise. So now I'm grasping at straws here. Are there other benefits, right? Like PTO or maybe insurance benefits I can maybe get some wiggle room on?
So there's an interesting trend here, and you actually see this in compensation studies across industries over the last 5 to 10 years. You've started to see a shift away from hard dollar benefits like health insurance or retirement benefits to soft dollar benefits like flex work schedules, PTO, etc., particularly in organizations or companies with recurring revenue models or subscription models versus transactional models. So, that's an easy one to say, like, hey, can I just get an extra day or two of PTO? Well, I mean, not only is that potentially going to get paid out to you if you have a banked PTO policy, but also, it's getting paid the same to work less. Therefore, your hourly or your salary has fundamentally gotten better. It doesn't increase your take home, but, the effort to outcome ratio improves there. And that is something to think about pretty seriously.
All right. And then my last question, I just had this thought while I was sitting here, right? It goes back to the making a case for yourself versus demanding a raise. And you said earlier, right? Make sure you're not just asking for more money, ask for more responsibility. What about in a scenario where you're already doing, essentially two people's jobs, right? Like you're doing your job, but you also already have more responsibility than you're really being paid for. At that point, it would be counterintuitive to now ask for more pay, more responsibility, because you can't take on anything more, right? You're in a position where you are overworked, underpaid. How do you navigate that conversation, maybe?
Well, and that's a tricky one because I'll ask the question, how did you end up in that spot? Becomes the thing, right? It's one thing if it's just, hey, you're overworked from day one and the responsibilities were more than you thought they would be versus there used to be two of you and now there's one of you and you've just had to pick up the slack entirely on that. I think that latter case is a lot easier to make the argument for. In the former case, I think you're probably stuck with it because it's sort of what it was from day one, and you're only complaining about it after the fact. Not to say you cannot make a complaint or make an ask related to it, but just saying like, hey, I took this job on the expectation that it would be kind of low effort, steady, and I am drowning in stuff constantly, and it's just a very different level of demand. I think that's really important to think about. I think also, and this is just a tough pill to swallow because we often take our work very personally, be mindful that sometimes a role is only worth so much in an organization, and it doesn't matter if you're excellent at it or exquisite at it or you're far above and advanced above the needs of the role itself, and you could definitely be doing more or better. but sometimes the organization just is not in a place or does not have the structure, does not have the revenue to support your personal ambitions. And so sometimes the no is not personal, it is just an organizational decision.
I'd assume it's almost never personal.
That's a little too generous on human nature for me. I think plenty of people are told no just because they annoy their manager.
Let me play devil's advocate with that one for a second, right? Like, think about from the employee's perspective too, right? You said, how'd you get in this position, right? Like, if that's what you've agreed to, now that's what you're stuck with. But if you are, in theory, doing two people's jobs, isn't that employee maybe sometimes so valuable that they can't get rid of them because they'd have to hire two people to do the one person's job? It's better to just appease them and give them a small bonus or a raise?
It definitely gives you leverage. I think it really becomes a question of, are you objectively doing two people's jobs, or do you just feel like you're doing two people's jobs? This becomes sort of a measuring stick of efficacy, and I'll use something like an hourly billing model as the example. One of the things I don't like about hourly billing models is the fact that I am a fast reader, a fast writer, a fast worker, and in an hourly model that would penalize me in every possible way than if I was less efficient. So sort of the inverse thing here to saying, I'm working two people's jobs. Are you actually working two people's jobs, or are you less efficient or effective and it feels like you're working two jobs? Not to say that that's the case for you, Daniel, but just in the general grand scheme of things, right? You know, for anybody who says like, I'm super overworked, are you actually overworked, or are you just struggling, with your level of responsibility?
All right. I think that's pretty good. All right. So I now realize I'm not getting paid enough, and apparently I'm not going to get a raise. So my income is now insufficient, and I am assessing alternative opportunities. First off, what are some key signs your current income is actually insufficient? Like, going back to, you said, look at data to see what people are getting paid relative to you.
Well, there's the market rate element and there's the personal element. So market rate, if you look out there and you're like, hey, I'm a software engineer with 10 years of experience here in the Boulder area, and people with my level of experience and credentials and so on are making 150, but I'm making 120. That's a pretty clear, just data-based argument. Be careful about medians and means here, because sometimes means can get inflated by a couple of high earners, or medians can be sort of awkwardly skewed where, yes, it's the middle number, but there's actually more of a barbell distribution or a skewed distribution on either side of that kind of median point. So be careful with those. Don't just rely on averages. Don't just rely on medians as the way to inform what you should or shouldn't be paid. On a personal level, it becomes a question of, am I able to effectuate my life goals reasonably for my career stage, right? Like, it's one thing to be a brand new college graduate and be like, yeah, I'm making okay money, but not great money. Like, yeah, you're brand new. You don't have 10, 20, 30 years of experience. You're not going to be making incredible money, generally speaking, relative to your particular profession or your occupation. On the other side of that, if you are your mid-30s, your mid-40s, and you're having a hard time saving for retirement and paying the mortgage and, getting your kid through school or saving for their college, and you have not been able to afford to take a vacation in a couple of years, then that just sort of becomes an indicator of, your income might be appropriate for your job and your responsibility and your scale, but it's not supporting your lifestyle. And you can take a hard look at that and say, my lifestyle is too much. But some people are doing only responsible things and are still having a hard time making ends meet. And that's really the crux of, I'm genuinely not making enough.
How do you find this information, right? Like, am I just going on the internet? Like, take what we do, for example. We are the premier, or, one of the first and, only probably hiring fee-only financial planning firms here in Longmont. Like, where am I supposed to find a comparison? There's nothing to compare to. Should I just be speaking to other advisors in the Boulder County area? Should I be looking at just the general statistics for the United States? Like, how do I go about doing that? Should I be more online, or should I be more talking to people in the industry I know?
I mean, I'll say both, but I want to zoom it out from financial planners just because that's a pretty niche example. I think you want to look at the national data and then inflation or regionally cost of living adjust it, right? So Boulder, I should be making more than the national average. Jackson, Mississippi, I should be making less than the national average. Big firm environment versus small firm environment. There's a lot of kind of push-pull sliders. Do I have comprehensive, robust benefits? Do I have no benefits? I think there are a lot of factors that go into that. I think for anybody listening, asking like, well, I'm not a financial planner, so like, what do I do as a teacher? What do I do as a engineer? What do I do as a lawyer? Again, look at national data sets. Bureau of Labor Statistics is helpful, although it sort of has a flat line where it stops reporting income, I believe, right now above 238,000 a year. So in certain occupations like legal or medical, you may hit a ceiling there where the data stops being helpful. I think Glassdoor is phenomenal, both because you can look at kind of salaries and offers in your region for your experience level, but also if you work for a big company like an Apple, like an Amazon, like a Microsoft, you can actually see what other people with your exact job title are getting paid in the organization and understand where you live on the pay spectrum for your particular role. And then ultimately, back to your question, right? I do think talking to your peers makes a lot of sense. I'm a big advocate of transparency and compensation, right? Anybody can ask me what I make, and I'll tell them the approximate number because I can never remember the exact dollar amount, but it's like 178 or 180 or something like that. But in that particular context, you can then also go to your peers and just say like, hey, here's what I make. What do you make? Because you gain knowledge there. You either learn, hey, I'm well paid for my role, or hey, they're well paid for their role and I have ambition now. But that information sharing benefits both of you, right? Whether it tells you that you have great comp or poor comp. So you do learn something from that. And I think it's meaningful to be open and willing. Don't brag, right? It's not supposed to be a status statement. I think that's the negative version of this. But if somebody asks you what you make, just answer the question. It doesn't hurt you at all to share that information, and it benefits them and can benefit you in turn.
And you've said it before, the only person who benefits from you not sharing that information is the employer, right? Because if one of you's paid considerably more than the other, it's nice that you don't know that.
Well, and that's where you get into the thing where some employers will try to say, like, you can't talk about it, or it's very confidential, or it's against our policies. It is illegal for an employer to prevent you from talking about your compensation. So if your employer says you can't do it or you're not allowed to do it, politely tell them too bad. Or just don't bring them into the conversation, right? Just talk to your peers and understand it. I will say, though, and this is something where, again, you do want to be conscious about not just talking purely salary, right? Salary plus variable compensation plus benefits should be part of that conversation, because it's easy to go to somebody and they're like, I make 90, or like, well, I make 75, I'm underpaid. But if you get full benefits and they don't have any benefits, you're probably making about the same in equivalent terms. So be mindful that it's more than just hourly, more than just dollars. Not to say that that is not probably the most important part of the formula, but recognize that the degree of benefits and variable compensation can be a substantially important part of that conversation.
Yeah, I mean, that's one we harp on. It's total compensation over just salary, right? All right, so I now realize I'm underpaid. I'm
Are you underpaid, Daniel?
I'm planning on making a switch, but, I don't want to just rip the Band-Aid off and then leave my employer and realize, crap, I didn't think about these 5 things. So I'm getting my ducks in a row financially. What do I need to do before actually making a switch to a new employer or finding a new job?
Big thing here, number one rule, and this sort of an investment expression that I'm curtailing into this compensation conversation. It is more important to not get killed in this process than it is to try to make a killing. Meaning, do not, quit your job for a Hail Mary bet without any guarantee or any soft landing or anything like that. Be very cognizant of the fact that when you're searching for a new opportunity for better comp, whatever it is you're looking for, that on the other side of that, right, there is an issue where fundamentally you can put yourself at risk by doing it. You sometimes hear about people quitting their jobs to really like double down on getting the next opportunity. Or sometimes people hate their job and they just want to get out of it as soon as possible and they'll figure it out afterwards. But understand that the cost is more than just the lost immediate wages. You are losing out on your benefits. You are increasing your healthcare costs. You are losing out on your retirement savings and compounding and matching. So there's a lot of, substantial costs to that switching activity if you don't have a smooth transition from point A to point B. I think it's the number one rule as you think about this problem.
Yeah, I think that's really good. I think it's also worth considering, right? Like, is this just you, right? So like if I left my job tomorrow, right? Like I still have rent. I don't have a partner that I'm living with that can subsidize me for a period of time. It's just me. I think you have to really weigh that into the consideration as well. If you're living with a partner, maybe you can afford financially to take a month or 3 off and be okay. What about, health insurance and like COBRA? Is that something I can be looking toward if I quit?
It is. I want to circle back, though, because bringing a partner into this conversation is very, very important as well. Don't do this stuff unilaterally. like, don't surprise your spouse or your boyfriend, your girlfriend, your partner, whoever they are, by just coming home and being like, yeah, I quit. And now I'm going to look for something else, because now you've shifted all of the responsibility for your financial needs onto that individual. So just being mindful of your responsibilities first, both whether you have dependents or whether you have a partner who has expectations about your financial status and stability as part of that. Now, to your new question, right? Benefits is a big thing. COBRA, which is Consolidated Omnibus Reconciliation Act, gives you the ability to continue a lot of benefits like health insurance after employment. Bear in mind that often employers are giving you health insurance or other benefits heavily subsidized, right? So a lot of people are like, oh, my health insurance is $40 a pay period. It's probably costing your employer anywhere from $500 to $1,000 a month. So while that continuity can be helpful, maybe they have a really good healthcare program, recognize that even though you can continue that benefit, it may suddenly go up 10, 20x from what you were paying previously. So being mindful of that. That's where you want to compare your COBRA benefit to just an Affordable Care Act, ACA public exchange option versus the next employer option as well.
Budget Reconciliation Act. You missed the B in COBRA.
I know that it gets you very excited to state that acronym very, very clearly. So here's the counter pop question. What year was that?
That's a great question. What year was it?
No idea.
That's all right. On the 2 times a year somebody asks me what COBRA stands for, it's probably the greatest question I get asked all year. At least my favorite to answer.
And yet you still don't have the year. You gotta brush up on that if it's so important.
Nobody's ever asked me the year, so I should be prepared for the next time somebody puts me on the spot there.
I want to say 84, but I think I'm actually taking the Federal Labor Standards Act from 94 and just bastardizing it when I say that. So my guess is 84, but I don't actually know or recall.
All right, so my last question here, right, is like, seems like there's a lot of things you got to get in place. There's first and foremost just a conversation to have with a spouse if you have one, as opposed to just coming home one day and saying, hey, oh, anything new at work today? Yeah, I quit. You want to do your research. You want to make sure you're not just jumping with both feet off the deck without some semblance of where you're going. Healthcare is a big consideration, right? And kind of planning out your runway financially, I'd assume, as well. That's a lot to do on your off hours. What are some, I don't even know if tips is the right word, but how do you kind of go about doing all of this while also maybe not making it obvious to your employer that you're on your way out?
Well, and whether you want to be obvious about it or not is its own conversation. So I'll take in some academia here for a second. There's what's called the trans-theoretical model of change, which essentially kind of takes you through the mental state of like being aware of an issue, we call pre-contemplation, and then contemplation, and then beginning the activities that effectuate the change. It's like a 7 or 8 step model. But, pre-contemplation for you might be Googling what people are paid, doing the market research, talking to your peers, etc. You're not like really, thinking about making a change. You're just kind of data gathering, learning something about your situation and considering it from that standpoint. I think as you then start to get more serious about it, it is starting to do the interviewing process. It's starting to do the outreach, trying to see if there really is a potential landing for you to make a transition or a change. And I think depending on the nature of your organization, your industry, your business, etc., that may or may not be the time to have a conversation about whether you are going to make a change with your employer or not. 2 benefits there. One, on the side of transparency. Number 1, most organizations, not all, but most organizations are not going to kick you out the second you say you're thinking about going somewhere. They're going to say, oh, sorry that you're not happy here. Sorry your needs aren't being met. What is there anything we could do to improve this, right? Or change the situation if it's possible. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. And then by extension from that, if you're working in tandem with them, then that gives everybody a good opportunity to kind of make it the best possible transition. Not everybody has that luxury. Some places you just got to give your 2 weeks notice, or some places you just got to hand in your apron and say, I'm out. So it's just a question of kind of what's customary in your business or in your industry and understanding the environment.
Is that so, really? I would assume almost every place, and I don't have a ton of experience, so I'm leaning on you and others here. Like, I'd assume for almost everywhere, I wouldn't want to tell my boss. I'd want to kind of hold things close to the vest and give them as minimal notice as possible while I give myself every opportunity to find something new. Why would I include them in my plans for the future if they don't, include me being with that employer?
We also, contemplate the fact, kind of it's a small world effect here, right? Lots of people in lots of industries find themselves working with their old colleagues and coworkers. We have clients who are now the boss of their old boss because they made a change, X years ago and did it, kind of in a upstanding way, such that they didn't like burn any bridges or ruin anything in the process of making that transition. I'll go back to Samantha, right? The first associate planner we had here at My Wealth Planners. She gave 4 months notice, and she came prepared. She came with her letter of resignation, ready for me to say, "You're fired, get out." And no, like I was never going to punish her for making that decision for herself. She was moving to Austin. It wasn't a situation where we could just like open an Austin office. But in that context, that was something where her being forthcoming and well communicating was beneficial to her, because then we were able to say, okay, great, let's adjust your work responsibilities and your scope and your timeline and all that to account for that. And in turn, it was great for the firm because it let us plan around that future need really effectively. Now, understandably, in some cases, again, it's not customary, it's not normal. And even in this industry, a lot of firms will say, thank you for your notice, we will let you go right now. So you kind of have to be prepared for the extremes there. But I think that is something where you want to think about it, not just as the immediate transition here, but as how does this affect me in the long, long term to, kind of sneak out versus trying to be open, communicating expectations and what we can both, anticipate going forward.
So what, I should just kind of play it off feel, right? Like, I think this is how my boss will respond. Let's roll the dice and hope.
Well, I come back to the first answer I gave to this sequence of questions, right? It's it's not about making killing, it's about not getting killed. By the time you start that communication, you should be comfortable with the possibility you could be let go in doing that. So that is something where, it would be good to be certain you want to make a change. It would be good to make sure you have the emergency fund reserve. You've talked to your partner, your spouse. You're not going to be in serious peril or jeopardy by making that change. And then conversely, right, you have to then contemplate the upside side. Now, if there is no upside, right, like if you just know your company, anytime somebody gives their notice, fires them immediately, there is no upside, and then fine. But if you understand or have an expectation or belief, right, you've seen somebody else make a gradual transition out, that it's more customary or normal in this organization to do that, then I think you just want to weigh the pros and cons.
So kind of like a plan for the worst, hope for the best a little bit.
Yeah, that's sort of a classic financial planning approach. And again, you are going to know your environment. You're going to know in a lot of cases that it is or isn't an option to begin with, and then just need to act accordingly. It's only in that sort of ambiguous middle that you kind of have to contemplate or weigh it so much.
Cool. All right. Well, wish me luck. I think I'm going to have that conversation coming up pretty soon here.
All right. Well, good luck on asking for that raise. Well, with that, let me ask, what have you learned over the last week that you think our audience would benefit from?
The Consolidated Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act was enacted in 1985 and signed into law in 1986.
Oh, it was so close. 1 year off.
I'd say just in addition to that, though, sometimes I think folks come to us, whether they've worked with us for a week or a month or a year or years. Like sometimes we find ourselves just holding space for conversations they haven't had before, especially when two spouses maybe have considerably different backgrounds or views around money. I think like we do this for a living, so it's natural for us with our partners to probably recognize the importance of these conversations and hold space for them in our personal lives, but that doesn't mean everybody else does. A lot of people come and have conversations and we'll just let them talk for 10 minutes and observe what both of them are saying. And it's not uncommon for them to say, this is the only time we actually ever talk about it is when we're here. And that's one of our favorite reasons for coming in person and having this conversation is it gives us a dedicated space that we hold for this specific conversation, which we don't have at home.
Yeah, there's a running joke in the financial planning land that we're actually marriage counselors or therapists. And we make that joke ourselves, but you've been in the room, right, when clients have said, very, very directly, like, you're our therapist, right? Or like, that, this is how we, settle our disagreements is by coming and having a conversation with you instead of talking to each other. And again, it sort of comes back to my comment on being willing to share your compensation, right? Money conversations are productive conversations. Sometimes they focus on positives, sometimes they focus on negatives. but I think there are very few conversations you can have with your partner, with your family about money that don't ultimately create a better outcome than not having had the conversation.
Good stuff.
The Science of Wealth is produced by My Wealth Planners, a registered investment advisor in Colorado. The theme song is This Is Your Time by Dan Phillips. The podcast is intended for educational purposes only and is not investment advice or any other form of advice. Not all material discussed on the podcast is appropriate for every individual in every circumstance, so you should consult with a certified financial planner, tax professional, or legal professional as appropriate before attempting to apply any of the subjects, strategies, or tactics discussed on the podcast.